The thing about abandoned megastructures in space is that they're like discarded relationships, vast, hollow, and filled with ghosts of things that never quite worked out. Captain Jaxley Jax Tumblefoot never cared much for ghosts, but here he was, leading his motley crew through the cold, echoing corridors of the forgotten Titan, a titanic AI construct that had seen more years than Jax had had bad haircuts. "I don't know about you," Jax said, swatting away a floating piece of metal debris, "but if I were the kind of AI capable of building something like this, I'd have taken up knitting. Less mess, more scarves." His second-in-command, a grizzled woman named Zed, because who needs more than one letter when life's already complicated, chuckled as she adjusted her blaster. "Nah, you'd be the AI that invents a new way to screw with humanity, just for kicks. Probably turn knitting needles into interstellar missiles," Jax smirked. "With my luck, they'd unravel faster than my last relationship." Behind them, the rest of the crew shuffled along, each with their own brand of disinterest. Lenny, the tech who had once tried to upgrade his own brain with a faulty biochip, was mumbling to himself about algorithms gone rogue. Behind him, Della and Trig, the muscle and the medic respectively, were betting on how long it would take before they hit something that wouldn't let them hit back. 50 credits on a homicidal cleaning droid, Della wagered, her eyes scanning the shadows like a hawk looking for its next excuse to pounce. "You're on," Trig replied, checking the scanner like it owed him money. "Just hope it doesn't leave streaks." They had all come prepared for the usual malfunctioning tech, probably some leftover defense systems that didn't get the memo about layoffs, and maybe, just maybe, some lost treasure from humanity's less-than-stellar past. But alien races with a bone to pick, that wasn't in the brochure. "Jax," Zed called, her voice low and tense. "You're going to want to see this." Jax turned, expecting to see maybe another chunk of debris or a particularly stubborn piece of software. Instead, he was greeted by a sight that made even his sarcasm take a backseat. Standing in the dim light of a broken holoprojector were beings that looked like an unfortunate blend of squids and fortune tellers, tentacles waving in a hypnotic dance, eyes that seemed to stare past, through, and around you all at once. Prognostians. "Well, aren't you a sight for sore optic nerves?" Jax muttered. One of the prognostians twitched in what Jax hoped was curiosity rather than indigestion. "Humans," it intoned in a voice that was like sandpaper made sentient, predictably unpredictable. "That's our charm," Jax replied, sidestepping a tentacle that was getting a little too friendly. "Nice palace you've got here. Love what you've done with the place." "It is not ours," the prognostian said, its tone as dry as a desert in a drought. "We have merely borrowed it." Zed narrowed her eyes, clearly unimpressed with their new acquaintances. "Borrowed, huh? Funny, humans have a different word for that. Starts with S, ends with tealing." The prognostian blinked, a slow, deliberate motion that suggested either deep thought or a very slow processor. "Semantics are irrelevant. We seek to reverse colonize your Earth." Jax raised an eyebrow. "Reverse colonize? Do you plan on giving back all the stuff we lost, or just the bits we won't miss?" "Your humor is noted," the prognostian muttered, as if reading from a script. "Our precognition shows us that your randomness is a threat to our plans." "Randomness," Lenny piped up, finally tearing himself away from his tech. "Buddy, it's called creativity." "Ever heard of it? It complicates our projections," the prognostian replied, its tentacles rippling in what could have been frustration or mild enthusiasm. "Hard to tell with those guys." Jack shrugged, a smile playing on his lips. "Well, unpredictability is kind of our thing. We've made an art form out of it. You should check out our history. It's a mess, but it's ours." Zed nodded, taking a step forward. "So you want to take Earth? Good luck with that. We've been trying to fix it for centuries. Besides, isn't foresight cheating? It is a tool," the prognostian said, a touch of defensiveness creeping into its voice. "A gift. Gift or curse depends on your perspective," Jax replied. "But here's the thing, Earth isn't some board game you can flip when the dice don't go your way." The prognostians seemed to confer silently, their tentacles weaving intricate patterns in the stale space air. Jax took it as a chance to regroup with his crew, motioning them into a huddle. "Ideas?" he asked, his tone laced with the kind of optimism that only comes from someone who knows full well they are in deep trouble. "We could try diplomacy," Trigg suggested, though even he sounded unconvinced. "Or we could run," Lenny added, his voice a little too eager. Della cracked her knuckles. "Or we could send him packing the good old-fashioned way." "With what?" Jax asked dryly. "Harsh language," Zed shook her head. "No, with unpredictability." Jax tilted his head. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Zed grinned, a wolfish expression that promised chaos. "Always?" Jax turned back to the prognostians, who had evidently concluded their group therapy session. "All right, squid oracles, how about a little wager?" The lead prognostian twitched. "A wager? Yeah, a bet," Jax said, his smile widening. "You see, humans love games, and we've got a doozy for you: rock, paper, scissors." The prognostians exchanged glances, or at least Jax thought they did. Hard to tell with creatures that had more eyes than he had fingers. We accept, the lead prognostian said, albeit hesitantly. Great, Jax replied, clasping his hands together. Here's how it works. You win, we leave. We win, you reconsider your moving plans. And how does this benefit us? The prognostian asked, suspicion dripping from its words. Jax shrugged. You've got precognition, right? Should be a piece of cake, unless you're scared. That did it. No self-respecting alien with a superiority complex would back down now. We accept, the prognostian said, as if it had just sealed the fate of the universe. The first round was a disaster for humanity. Jax threw rock, the prognostian threw paper, if its tentacle movements could be called that. But Jax wasn't worried. Not yet. Best of three, he declared, eyes twinkling with mischief. The second round was a tie. Both chose scissors, though the prognostian's attempt looked more like a horrific dance routine gone wrong. Then came the final round. Jax focused, summoning every ounce of randomness he could muster. He threw paper. The prognostian hesitated, its tentacle twitching, wavering between rock and scissors before finally settling on rock. Jax whooped, clapping his hands. Paper beats rock. Looks like you're stuck with us for a bit longer. The prognostian's tentacles drooped, an alien equivalent of a sigh. Your unpredictability. It is infuriating. That's the spirit, Jax said, clapping it on what he hoped was a shoulder. Welcome to the Chaos Club. As the prognostians slowly withdrew, conspiratorial murmurs echoing in their wake, Jax turned to his crew, his grin wider than ever. All right, folks, let's get this bucket of bolts moving. We've got a planet to save. Still can't believe that worked, Lenny said, shaking his head. Never underestimate the power of dumb luck, Zed replied, patting him on the back. Jax led them back down the corridor, their footsteps echoing in a space that seemed a little less haunted than before. Next time, remind me to bring a deck of cards, he said, as they exited the megastructure. As the crew piled into their battered ship, the Lucky Break, and prepared to leave, Jax took one last look at the forgotten Titan. You ever get the feeling we've bitten off more than we can chew? Zed shrugged, her eyes scanning the controls. Always, but that's what makes it fun, right? Jax laughed, a sound that was more bark than mirth. Right, let's head home and see what fresh hell we can stir up next. As the engines roared to life and the ship lifted off, Jax felt the familiar thrill of uncertainty. In space, unpredictability was the one constant, and he wouldn't have it any other way. The Lucky Break shot into the void, leaving behind the empty halls of the forgotten Titan and the frustrated prognostians, a testament to the human penchant for chaos, chance, and the occasional impossible victory. As the Lucky Break drifted away from the forgotten Titan, Captain Jax Tumblefoot leaned back in his seat, a satisfied smirk plastered across his face. The stars outside the cockpit window twinkled like 1,000 sarcastic comments he hadn't yet made, and he felt right at home. You know, Jax began, looking over at Zed, who was piloting with the casual disregard of someone who believed autopilot was for the lazy. I think we made some friends today. Friends, Zed's voice was dry enough to suck the moisture out of a water planet. More like frenemies with tentacles and superiority complexes. Same difference, Jax replied, waving a hand dismissively. They'll think twice before underestimating good old human randomness again. Speaking of randomness, Lenny chimed in from the back, where he was fiddling with a loose panel that had once been part of the ship's state-of-the-art navigation system before he had tried to improve it. Did anyone else notice that the prognostians seemed a little off their game? Yeah, Della said, stretching out her muscled arms in the cramped space. Like they were expecting a different kind of stupid from us. Or maybe, Trig the medic added with a chuckle, their crystal balls were on the fritz, happens to the best of us. Or, Jax interrupted, with the air of someone about to drop a particularly juicy piece of gossip, maybe they can't predict what they don't understand. And let's face it, folks, we're a walking, talking conundrum. More like a walking, talking migraine, Zed muttered under her breath. Jax leaned forward, eyes gleaming with mischief. Let's give them a real headache. Turn us around, Zed. We're going back. The crew exchanged glances, a mixture of surprise and exasperation. Why? Lenny asked, his voice tinged with the type of curiosity that usually ended with someone getting stranded on a backwater moon. Because, Jax said, grinning like a cat that had just discovered a mouse farm, we're going to show them just how unpredictable we can be. The forgotten Titan loomed once again before them, a hulking mass of metal and forgotten dreams. It was like stepping back into an awkward family reunion, complete with the relatives you wished had stayed lost in hyperspace. Zed piloted the ship into the docking bay with a flair that suggested she was more interested in precision crashes than smooth landings. Touchdown, she announced, with the enthusiasm of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. As they disembarked, Jax took the lead, marching back into the echoing corridors with the air of a conqueror returning to his kingdom. All right, he said, clapping his hands together. Let's make some noise. Noise? Della asked, raising an eyebrow. What kind of noise? The kind that messes with alien heads, Jax replied. Lenny, how's that little toy of yours coming along? Lenny grinned, holding up a device that looked like it had been assembled during a caffeine-fueled all-nighter. Oh, it's ready to go. I call it the Chaos Emitter. Sounds like my kind of gadget, Jax said, nodding approvingly. Fire it up, Lenny pressed a button, and the device began to hum ominously, the kind of hum that promised either spectacular success or a fireworks display of failure. Within seconds, the lights flickered, and the walls shuddered as if the megastructure itself was trying to shake off an itch. What's it doing? Trig asked, peering at the device with a mixture of awe and trepidation. Generating random signals, Lenny explained, the kind of technobabble that usually ended in something catching fire. Should drive the Prognostians' precognition nuts. As if on cue, a familiar Sandpapery voice echoed down the corridor. Humans, what is this madness? Jax turned to see the Prognostians reappearing, their tentacles twitching like they'd been caught in a wind tunnel. That, my friends, he said, pointing to the device, is what we call a little human ingenuity, or insanity. Take your pick. You cannot disrupt the flow of time, the lead Prognostian insisted, though its voice wavered slightly. Sure we can, Jax replied, leaning casually against a wall. We do it all the time. Just ask our calendar. Zed stepped forward, crossing her arms with the air of someone who wasn't going to take any nonsense. Besides, you said it yourself, our unpredictability was a threat to your plans. We did not predict this, the Prognostian admitted, its tentacles nodding in what Jax assumed was confusion. That's the beauty of humans, Jax said, spreading his arms wide. Just when you think you've got us figured out, we go and do something completely off the wall, or off our rockers, Della added with a grin. Lenny's device continued to pulse erratically, causing various panels to spark and flicker. The Prognostians seemed to be having a collective existential crisis, their tentacles now performing a frantic dance that was equal parts modern art and sheer panic. Cease this at once, demanded the Prognostian, though it sounded more like a plea than an order. But why? Jax asked, feigning innocence. It's just a little fun. The flow must be restored, the alien insisted, its voice rising in pitch. Tell you what, Jax said, adopting the tone of someone offering a particularly juicy deal or used spaceship lot. You drop your plans to reverse colonize Earth, and we might just switch off the chaos. The Prognostians huddled together, clearly thrown off by a threat they couldn't measure or predict. Jax and his crew watched as the aliens' murmurs filled the corridor, a symphony of confusion and disbelief. Look at him, Zed whispered, her voice tinged with amusement. You'd think they just found out they were adopted. Finally, the lead Prognostian turned back to Jax, its tentacles drooping like wet noodles. We will consider your proposal. Fantastic, Jax replied, clapping his hands together. We'll expect a decision by the time we've had our breakfast. With that, the crew turned on their heels and marched back to the lucky break, leaving the Prognostians to stew in their own uncertainty. Back aboard their ship, Jax settled into the captain's chair, a satisfied grin on his face. Well, that was fun. Who knew chaos could be so effective, Trig echoed, raising an eyebrow. More like potentially catastrophic. What if they decide to retaliate? Then we get to show them round 2 of human ingenuity, Della said, cracking her knuckles with anticipation. Lenny, still holding his chaos emitter like a proud new parent, nodded eagerly. I can always tweak the settings. Maybe add some sound effects next time. You mean make it more annoying? Zed asked, her eyes narrowing playfully. Exactly, Lenny replied with a grin. Think of it as psychological warfare. Jax chuckled, shaking his head. Never thought I'd see the day when we'd take on a bunch of psychic squids with a jerry-rigged piece of tech and some good old-fashioned confusion. Welcome to the future, Zed said, her voice dripping with irony. It's a circus and we're the clowns. The crew laughed, the tension from their earlier encounter dissipating like smoke from a spent blaster. For a moment, the vastness of space seemed less daunting, less filled with unknowable threats. What's next on the agenda, Captain? Trig asked, eyeing Jax with a mixture of curiosity and resignation. First, we figure out what to do with the Prognostians. Then maybe we can finally get a decent meal, Jax replied, rubbing his hands together in anticipation. I've got a craving for something that doesn't come in a can. Zed punched in coordinates, her movements fluid and sure. Back to the nearest station then, sounds good. Let's hope the Prognostians make the right choice, Jax said, leaning back as the lucky break rumbled to life. As they sped away from the forgotten Titan, Jax felt a rare sense of satisfaction. They'd faced impossible odds and come out on top, not with brute force or elaborate plans, but with the one thing they had in abundance, unpredictability. And if there's one thing humans excelled at, it was keeping the universe on its toes. As the lucky break hummed through the void of space, Jax couldn't help but feel a pang of pride. Pride in a job well done, pride in his motley crew, pride in the fact that they'd managed to confuse the prognostians into a temporary truce with nothing more than a cobbled-together chaos generator and a hefty serving of unpredictability. He was practically beaming, which, given the situation, was probably a sign of mental instability. How long you reckon before those prognostians decide that our unpredictability is more annoying than useful? Trig asked, fiddling with a med kit that looked like it had seen better days. Depends, Jax replied, leaning back in his chair. On whether they fancy another round of guess what the humans will do next. Seems they aren't fans of losing, Lenny chuckled, dismantling the chaos emitter with the casual indifference of someone who wasn't sure if it would explode or not. Zed, piloting with her usual laissez-faire approach, glanced over her shoulder. We're approaching the station, boss. Time to stock up on the essentials, like bourbon and instant noodles, Della added, stretching her arms until her joints popped like firecrackers. Don't forget duct tape, Jax noted. Can't fly a ship without it. The station came into view, a sprawling cluster of metal and neon, orbiting a gas giant like a sore thumb in a cosmic quilt. As they docked, the crew disembarked, each member heading off on their own personal errands, except for Jax, who had a meeting to arrange. Sprocket, how's our ship looking? Jax asked, locating the quirky engineer who seemed to know the lucky break better than his own reflection. Sprocket, a wiry little gremlin of a man, scratched his head through a mop of unruly hair. Still flying, ain't she? Though I'd suggest not poking the warp drive too hard. She's like me, temperamental. Jax grinned. Temperamental's just another word for lively. Lenny sidled up, his hands full of contraband electronics. Any chance you can rig the nav systems to throw off any prognostian scanners? I hear they're getting desperate. Desperate's good, Sprocket replied, his eyes lighting up with a gleam that suggested imminent mischief. I'll see what I can do. Maybe add a little jazz to the signal. Keep him guessing. Meanwhile, Thyra, the optimistic botanist who somehow managed to keep a small shrub alive in space, approached with a smile that was as out of place on their ship as an ice cream cone on a battlefield. I picked up some seeds, thought we might try growing some fresh herbs. Herbs, huh? Jax nodded, mostly to humor her. What are the chances they don't mutate into something carnivorous? Thyra's smile didn't waver. I'd say about 50-50, but hey, no risk, no reward. With the crew off on their errands, Jax found himself with a rare moment of quiet. Naturally, it didn't last. His comm device buzzed to life, and the harried voice of the station's quartermaster filled his ear. Captain Tumblefoot, we got problems. The voice crackled, like someone speaking through a blender. Join the club, Jax muttered, scanning the station for any immediate threats. What's the issue? The prognostians have docked. They're demanding a negotiation. Perfect, Jax said, rolling his eyes toward the ceiling, as if the universe would take his complaints under advisement. I'll deal with it. What's life without a little diplomacy mixed with potential violence? With a weary sigh, Jax rallied his crew, gathering them in the station's dimly lit conference room. The air smelled like burnt coffee and old arguments, a perfect setting for interstellar negotiations. All right, team, Jax said, looking at his crew, our prognostian pals want to chat. Let's try to be friendly, but not too friendly. Remember, we're unpredictable, not suicidal. Sprocket twiddled with a screwdriver, his mind clearly elsewhere. Thyra fussed over a small potted plant, while Zed leaned casually against the wall, arms crossed and eyes sharp. The prognostians arrived with all the fanfare of a group of accountants entering a rock concert. Their lead, tentacles a bit more droopy than before, moved forward. Captain Tumblefoot, it intoned, attempting gravitas but sounding more like a deflating balloon, we wish to discuss your recent activities. I've been known to dabble, Jax responded, motioning them to sit. What can we do for you? Our precognition fails to account for your crew's erratic nature. It disrupts our ability to plan. Jax flashed a grin. That's humans for you. We're like a box of chocolates. You never know when one's gonna melt all over your plans. The prognostian's tentacles twitched, possibly in frustration or possibly because it was struggling with a particularly tough philosophical quandary. We propose an exchange of knowledge. If we can understand your unpredictability, we might find a path to coexistence. Zed snorted. You want to understand us? That's like trying to find logic in a soap opera. Good luck. Ignoring the jibe, the prognostian continued. We offer access to our historical archives, including data on past human encounters. Sounds fascinating, Lenny chimed in, rubbing his chin. But what do we give you in return? A crash course in chaos theory. The alien hesitated. We require only your advice on certain strategic unpredictabilities. Advice, huh? Jax mused, leaning back with the air of someone who'd just been offered a chocolate-covered grenade. Tell you what, give us access to your data, and we'll throw in a few pointers on the fine art of chaos. Trig, ever the diplomat, leaned in. Plus a few tips on why sometimes it's just better to wing it. The prognostians conferred among themselves, their whispers like the rustling of old parchment. Jax watched, amused at the thought of an alien race scrambling to understand the erratic nature of human logic. "We agree," the lead prognostian finally said, its tone resigned yet hopeful. With the deal struck, Jax called an end to the meeting. As the aliens retreated, he turned to his crew, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Well, folks," he said, "I think we just sold them a ticket to the greatest show in the galaxy, the human condition. And what a circus it is," Della added, cracking her knuckles with anticipation. "Let's hope they've got popcorn." Back on the lucky break, with the prognostian archives now accessible, the crew gathered around a flickering display. Images of past encounters scrolled by, revealing alien interpretations of human unpredictability that ranged from flattering to outright absurd. "Look at this one," Sprocket said, pointing at a depiction of a human crew dancing around a bonfire. "They think we hold ritual dances before battle." "Well," Trig said with a grin, "some of us do. A little moonshine and a lot of courage." "What's this supposed to be?" Thyra asked, indicating a diagram that looked suspiciously like a flowchart of human decision-making. "That's not a flowchart," Lenny chuckled. "It's a Jackson Pollock painting." They laughed, the tension of the situation dissolving into camaraderie. For now, the prognostians were a puzzle, not a threat. And as long as they could keep them guessing, they had the upper hand. Jax leaned back, satisfied. "All right, crew, we've got their attention. Let's keep it." With new data to pour over and a galaxy full of chaos yet to sow, the crew of the Lucky Break settled in for the ride, ready to face the unpredictable universe with a smile and a smirk. As the stars streaked by outside, Jax couldn't help but chuckle. In a galaxy full of certainties, it turned out that being a little bit unpredictable was their greatest strength. And if the prognostians wanted to learn that lesson the hard way, well, who was he to stop them? "Next stop," Zed asked, glancing over the controls. Jax pondered for a moment, then grinned. "Somewhere new. Somewhere unexpected." And with that, the Lucky Break shot off into the unknown, a testament to the wild, wonderful unpredictability of human nature. "All right, folks," Jax announced, strutting into the common area where the crew had gathered, like a rooster who'd just discovered a particularly juicy worm. "I've got some news that'll either make us heroes or turn us into cosmic graffiti." "Oh joy," Zed muttered, flipping a toothpick between her teeth. "What's the deal this time?" Jax grinned, the kind of grin that suggested he was either about to save the galaxy or blow it up. "Turns out our little playground, the Forgotten Titan, is hiding a control room, and guess what? It's got the power to mess with the prognostians' long-range comms. We might just have a way to keep them off our tails. Permanently." Lenny raised an eyebrow, leaning against a bulkhead with the casual indifference of a man who'd seen it all and then some. "And what do we have to do? Just waltz in and press a big red button that says do not touch." "Something like that," Jax shrugged. "Except the button's probably booby-trapped, and waltzing involves avoiding a maze of death lasers. So, a normal Tuesday," Della said, cracking her knuckles as if they were gunshots. "I'm in." Sprocket, who'd been busy trying to untangle a mess of wires that looked suspiciously like a rat's nest, perked up. "Count me in too. Always wanted to see how these AI constructs tick. And maybe make them stop ticking." Thyra raised a hand, her fingers stained with soil from her latest botanical adventure. "And the plants," Jax turned to her, trying to look solemn but failing miserably. "Well, Thyra, if this goes pear-shaped, they'll either get a new light source or become the new master race. Either way, they'll be fine. Good enough for me," she replied with a cheerful nod. "Let's go save the universe or die trying." Trig, ever the realist, tapped the med kit hanging at his belt. "And I'll be ready with bandages for whoever ends up on the wrong end of a prognostian tentacle." Again, Jax clapped his hands together, all business now. "All right, Sprocket Lenny, find us a way into that control room without triggering every alarm known to alien kind. Zed, keep the engines warm. We might need a hasty retreat if things go south." "South," Zed scoffed, strolling over to the navigation console. "Captain, when have things ever gone north with us?" As if on cue, the ship's comms crackled to life with a voice that sounded like a blender full of gravel. "Unidentified vessel, you have trespassed on prognostian territory. Prepare to be boarded." "Ah, the welcoming committee," Jax quipped, motioning for Zed to mute the channel. "Let's make sure they don't stay for dinner." The Lucky Break maneuvered closer to the Forgotten Titan, its dark silhouette looming against the backdrop of distant stars. The AI construct stood like a forgotten elder god, its secrets buried beneath layers of dust and dormant systems. "All right," Jax said, gesturing at the view screen. "That control room's somewhere in the belly of the beast. Lenny, Sprocket, you're up." The two men exchanged a look, part excitement, part dread. "Let's go push some buttons we're not supposed to," Lenny declared, grabbing a toolkit filled with enough gadgets to make a Swiss Army knife look like a toothpick. The duo suited up and stepped into the airlock. Sprocket gave Jax a thumbs up that could have been encouraging or a final farewell. It was hard to tell with him. "Della, back him up," Jax ordered, nodding at the holographic map of the Forgotten Titan. You can handle any curious onlookers. With pleasure, Della replied, hefting a pulse rifle. I'm an excellent tour guide. As they breached the silent halls of the Titan, their footsteps echoed like whispers through a long-forgotten crypt. The air was stale, filled with the scent of machinery gone unused for countless years. Looks like a museum of bad ideas, Lenny muttered as they crept through corridors lined with dormant consoles and twisted metal. More like a graveyard for cautionary tales, Sprocket corrected, peering at a control panel with curiosity. And we've got front row tickets. Della led the way, her rifle at the ready. Just remember, if you see anything with too many eyes or tentacles, shoot first, ask questions never. They pushed deeper into the Titan's interior, following the map toward the control room. Each turn felt like a step further into the unknown, and the ship creaked around them with the groan of ancient, neglected metal. Meanwhile, back on the Lucky Break, Jax monitored their progress. The Precognition comms were still buzzing with demands and threats, but none of them had the creative flair Jax expected from a species so advanced. Think they'll actually try to board us? Thyra asked, tending to her plants with one eye on the radar. Let them try, Jax said, a smirk tugging at his lips. Worst case, we give them a close-up tour of the Lucky Break's most impressive feature, its ability to fall apart at the slightest provocation. As Lenny, Sprocket, and Della reached the control room, they found the door sealed tight, a relic of superior alien engineering. Lenny set to work on the lock, his fingers moving with the precision of a concert pianist with a death wish. Can you get it open? Della asked, keeping watch down the corridor. If I can't, it'll be the universe's fault for not making a lock that likes me, Lenny replied, his tongue poking from the corner of his mouth as he worked. With a satisfying click, the door slid open, revealing a room filled with monitors, buttons, and enough blinking lights to make a Christmas tree weep with envy. Home sweet home, Sprocket murmured, stepping inside and eyeing the panels with the awe of a kid in a candy store. Let's not press anything until we know what it does, Della warned, casting a wary glance at a particularly ominous-looking lever labeled in alien script. Wouldn't want to accidentally start a war. Lenny got to work on the main console, his hands moving with the confidence of someone who didn't know the meaning of the word failure. If we can get this thing powered up, we might just be able to give the Precognitions a little radio silence. Sprocket joined him, poking at the controls with a gleeful curiosity. Or we could accidentally broadcast our captain's favorite shower songs across the quadrant. Either way, win-win. Della stood guard, the hum of the ship surrounding them like a predator waiting to pounce. Just hurry it up, we've got company. Sure enough, the sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor, a rhythmic march of something that definitely wasn't friendly. Back on the Lucky Break, Jax watched the radar with growing concern. Looks like our green friends have decided to crash the party. Think they'll be impressed by our hospitality? Trig asked, checking his med kit one more time. Let's hope they're too busy dodging our unpredictability to notice, Jax said with a wry smile. All right, Zed, keep us ready for a quick getaway. Everyone else prepared to repel boarders. As the Precognitions got closer, the tension aboard the Lucky Break wound tighter than a spring ready to snap. Down in the forgotten Titan, the trio worked frantically, trying to bring the control room to life. The console flickered, sputtered, then roared to life with a symphony of lights and sounds that promised either salvation or disaster. Got it, Lenny crowed, punching the air with his fist. Now let's see if we can make those Precognitions wish they'd stayed home. Sprocket tapped a few keys, and the display filled with alien script, shifting and changing like a puzzle that refused to be solved. We'll need a few minutes to figure this out. Minutes we might not have, Della said, listening to the approaching footsteps with growing impatience. As the Precognitions stormed closer, Jax rallied his crew. All right, everyone, let's show them why it's a bad idea to underestimate the Lucky Break. Thyra, armed with a makeshift weapon that looked suspiciously like a garden tool, gave him a thumbs up. They won't know what hit him. Back in the control room, Lenny and Sprocket worked feverishly, their fingers dancing across the controls in a frantic attempt to decipher the alien technology. Della's eyes narrowed as the Precognitions came into view, their tentacles twitching with anticipation. Time's up. Just as she raised her rifle, the console beeped, and the room thrummed with energy. Lenny grinned, triumph in his eyes. We're live. Sprocket's fingers flew over the controls, and a wave of static washed over the ship's comms. That should keep him busy. The Precognitions paused, confusion flickering through their ranks as their comms filled with a cacophony of white noise and garbled transmissions. Let's move, Della shouted, leading the charge back toward the Lucky Break, her rifle blazing a path through the stunned aliens. As they raced back, the station's lights flickered, the AI construct coming to life with a vengeance. Panels opened, machinery whirred, and the ship groaned as if awakening from a long slumber. Whatever you did, Lenny puffed, running alongside Sprocket, I think you woke up the whole damn ship. Good, Sprocket replied, a gleam of satisfaction in his eyes. Let them deal with a little chaos. Back on the lucky break, the crew braced themselves for an escape, Zed's hands flying over the control panel with practiced ease. Jax watched the scene unfold on the monitor, a grin playing on his lips. Looks like we gave them something to think about. As the lucky break pulled away from the forgotten Titan, the Precognition ship scrambled to regroup, their comms still a symphony of static and confusion. Well, that was fun, Trig remarked, slumping into a chair with a weary sigh. Let's never do it again. Oh, we will, Jax said, a twinkle of mischief in his eyes. Because if there's one thing we're good at, it's making a mess and running away. The stars beckoned as the lucky break shot off into the unknown, leaving behind a wake of chaos and a story worth telling. In the grand tapestry of space adventures, they were the rogue thread that refused to follow the pattern, and that, Jax mused, was perfectly fine by him. The lucky break wasn't living up to its name. In fact, it was living down to every single unflattering nickname the crew had ever given it: the Rust Bucket, the Disaster Piece, and Jax's personal favorite, the Cosmic Joke. Floating in the shadow of the forgotten Titan, with Precognition ships closing in, the situation was about as bleak as a tar pit. Well, isn't this cozy? Jax mused from the cockpit, his words seasoned with sarcasm. He glanced over at Thyra, who was still fussing with her plants in the corner. Got any green-thumbed magic to get us out of this mess? Unless they're allergic to petunias, no, she replied, not looking up. Her voice had the edge of someone who'd seen one too many life-or-death scrambles and wasn't particularly impressed by this one. Figures, Jax sighed, drumming his fingers on the console. Guess we'll have to rely on Plan B, sheer dumb luck. Meanwhile, Zed was juggling the comms, trying to make sense of the Precognition's static-laden threats. They're annoyed, but I'm not sure if it's about us or their own comms being on the fritz. Trig, ever the optimist, chimed in. Maybe they'll just implode from sheer frustration. If only our luck ran that way. Jax shot him a look. If that happens, drinks are on me, but don't hold your breath. The Precognitions were organizing outside, their ship sleek and ominous like a pack of wolves circling a wounded deer. Precognitions didn't play fair, and they certainly didn't play quietly. Still, if there was one thing the crew of the Lucky Break excelled at, it was not giving a damn about the odds. The comms crackled with another garbled message, and Zed shook his head. They're saying something about surrender, as if we're about to roll over and beg. Let them talk, Jax snorted. We'll just keep them guessing. Back on the forgotten Titan, Lenny, Sprocket, and Della were making their less-than-graceful exit, the sound of their hurried steps echoing like gunfire in the ancient halls. The Precognitions they'd left behind were too busy untangling the mess the crew had made of their comms to give chase, but luck was a fickle friend. Think they'll throw us a parade for this, Lenny puffed, his breath ragged as he sprinted down the corridor. If by parade you mean a firing squad, then yeah, Sprocket retorted, vaulting over a bundle of cables with surprising agility. We need to light a fire under it. Della, taking up the rear, kept her rifle trained on the path behind. Let's just hope Jax has a plan that doesn't end with us as space debris. They skidded into the airlock, panting but exhilarated. The Lucky Break, a sight for sore eyes if ever there was one, loomed ahead like the world's shoddiest beacon of hope. Welcome back to paradise, Jax's voice crackled over their earpieces as they clambered aboard, the airlock sealing with a reassuring hiss. We're just about ready for the next dance number. Would that be the one where we don't die? Lenny asked, collapsing into a chair with a groan. Not sure. I may have skipped a few steps, Jax replied, busy at the helm. But who needs choreography when you've got improv? Sprocket dropped into the navigator's seat, his fingers already flying across the controls. All right, so what's the plan? Make them chase us until they die of boredom. Something like that, Jax said with a grin. But first we need to give them a taste of our signature move, running away screaming. As the Precognitions closed in, the air on the Lucky Break felt charged, every creak and jolt a testament to the ship's barely held-together state. Yet beneath the surface, the crew's camaraderie buzzed like a live wire, an unspoken agreement that they'd stick together whether they were flying high or crashing down. Zed, eyes glued to the radar, gave a low whistle. They've got us boxed in. It's like they think this is a fair fight. News flash, it never is, Della said, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed. But we're not the kind to play by the rules. Jax nodded, the grin never leaving his face. Let's show them what happens when you try to outguess the unguessable. The Precognitions, arrogant in their assumption of superiority, didn't realize that the real danger of the Lucky Break wasn't its firepower or speed, but its unpredictability. No one, not even the crew, ever knew what the ship would do next. Jax counted on that, like a gambler who always bet on chaos. All right, people, Jax called out, his tone commanding but infused with a playful edge. Let's give them a performance they'll never forget. With a flick of a switch, the Lucky Break lurched into motion, engines roaring like a beast awakened. The Precognitions scrambled to adjust, their sleek ships darting in pursuit. Engage the chaos emitter, Jax ordered, his eyes gleaming with mischief. Let's see if we can add a little static to their day. Sprocket complied, and almost immediately, the ship's comms burst into a flurry of discordant signals. The Prognostians' formation wavered, their tightly knit ranks splintering like a shattered mirror. Looks like they're having a bad day, Lenny quipped, watching the chaos unfold on the view screen. Good, Thyra said, finally tearing her attention from her plants. Serves them right for thinking they could outsmart a bunch of misfits held together by duct tape and bad decisions. As the Prognostian ships reeled, the Lucky Break weaved through the stars with reckless abandon, its trajectory as erratic as its crew. Jax piloted the ship with the nonchalance of someone who had nothing left to lose. The Prognostians were left in the wake of the Lucky Break's trail, struggling to regain their bearings as their comms reached a crescendo of confusion. It was a symphony composed by chaos, directed by the universe's most unlikely maestros. Nice work, Jax remarked, his voice carrying a hint of pride. Now let's see if we can actually make it out of here in one piece. Trig, strapping himself into a seat, shrugged. Maybe not, but at least we'll make it memorable. The Prognostians regrouped, their ships reforming with grim determination. They might have underestimated the Lucky Break once, but they were quick learners and not inclined to make the same mistake twice. Time to kick it up a notch, Jax announced, his hands dancing across the controls. Zed, give me everything this bucket's got. It's time to show them what a real headache looks like. The Lucky Break surged forward, its engines screaming in protest, but holding together by the skin of their teeth. The ship darted through the void like a caged animal, finally given a taste of freedom, every movement an audacious challenge to the cosmos itself. Let's hope this thing doesn't decide to fall apart at the worst moment, Thyra muttered, clutching her makeshift weapon, a trowel with delusions of grandeur. If it does, we go out with style, Trig replied, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. The Prognostians, relentless in their pursuit, couldn't keep up with the Lucky Break's erratic maneuvering. The ship twisted and turned, defying the laws of physics and common sense with every move. Are we actually getting out of this? Lenny asked, watching the distance between them and the Prognostians grow. Looks like it, Jax replied, his tone light but focused. But don't count your chickens until they are all fried and served with gravy. As the Lucky Break shot away from the forgotten Titan, the Prognostian ships dwindled in the rearview, their comms still a chaotic symphony of frustration and static. Well, that was a lovely little jaunt, Sprocket said, reclining in his seat with a satisfied sigh. Think they'll send us a thank you card. If they do, it'll be a bomb, Della remarked, finally lowering her rifle. But what's life without a little risk? The Lucky Break continued its retreat, the vastness of space stretching before it like an uncharted sea. Behind them, the Prognostians licked their wounds, left to ponder the enigma of a crew that refused to follow any rulebook save their own. Here's to unpredictability, Jax said, raising an imaginary glass, and to making sure the universe never gets bored of us. The crew of the Lucky Break, bound together by their shared defiance and the simple joy of surviving another day, laughed and cheered, their voices carrying through the ship like a victorious anthem. As they sailed into the unknown, the stars their only guide, Jax couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction wash over him. They might have been outmatched, outgunned, and out of their minds, but for now, they'd won their freedom. And as far as Jax was concerned, that was the only prize worth fighting for. The crew of the Lucky Break sat in a temporary lull, their breaths a rhythmic panting that resonated with the familiar thrum of the ship's engines. It was the sound of barely controlled chaos, a lullaby for those who only knew how to dance at the edge of disaster. Jax leaned back in his chair, hands still on the controls as if they were an extension of his own body. Well, that was a fun little jaunt, he said, a smirk playing on his lips. I give it a solid 9 out of 10 for near-death experiences. Only a 9, Trig quipped, his helmet off, revealing a head of hair that looked like it had lost its battle with a small tornado. I think the part where we nearly got vaporized should bump it to at least a 9.5. Let's not get greedy, Zed chimed in from his station, one eye on the comms, the other on the Prognostians still lingering on the radar like a bad smell. I've got a feeling our luck's about to change, and not in the good way, Jax snorted. When has it ever? Thyra, who had been quietly nursing her plants as if they were the only sane things in this universe, finally looked up. You know, it's funny how we keep surviving by the skin of our teeth, almost like we're meant to be here, Jax chuckled. Or maybe the universe just enjoys a good joke. The Prognostians, apparently tired of chasing a ship that refused to play by the rules, were regrouping. Their sleek, ominous ships hovered in the distance, a reminder that they'd be back, probably angrier and more determined than before. They'll be back, Della said, cleaning her rifle with the precision of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. And they'll bring more friends. Great, Lenny muttered, rubbing a bruise forming on his arm from the last collision with the console. Because we needed more reasons to die spectacularly. Sprocket, ever the tinkerer, was already fiddling with the controls, his fingers moving with the dexterity of a spider weaving its web. You know, he said thoughtfully, we could really use an ace up our sleeve right about now. Ace, Jax tilted his head, a glint of something dangerous in his eyes, the kind of look that usually preceded one of his infamous improvisations. Come on, Jax, Zed said, sensing the shift in the air. What's cooking in that devious little mind of yours? Jax pushed himself up from the chair, a plan forming faster than the crew could keep up with. Remember the AI construct in the Forgotten Titan? He began, voice excited, like a kid who'd just discovered a hidden stash of candy. The one that's been sitting dormant, waiting for purpose. You mean the one that's likely to fry us all if we sneeze at it the wrong way, Lenny interjected. Yeah, that one, Jax grinned, showing teeth. I think it's time to wake the dead. Wake the dead, Trig frowned. I don't think ghosts are going to scare the Prognostians off. Jax shook his head. Not ghosts, Trig, chaos incarnate. That AI can amplify the randomness factor in our maneuvers, make us even more unpredictable. Unpredictable, Thyra echoed, her voice carrying a rare note of optimism. Enough to break their precognition. Zed rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Worth a shot, they can't predict what they can't understand. Sounds like a plan, Della agreed, though her eyes were wary. Let's just hope it doesn't backfire and turn us into space debris. Jax clapped his hands together, the sound sharp and decisive. Let's make this happen, people. The crew converged around the central console, a motley group united by a single shared madness. Sprocket pulled up the schematics of the Forgotten Titan, the ancient lines and nodes glowing with an eerie light. This is it, he said, pointing to the node representing the AI core. This is where we either make history or become it. No pressure then, Lenny said dryly. Della shrugged. I've had worse odds. Okay, so how do we do this? Trig asked, looking around at his crewmates. Do we just knock on the door and say hello, mister? AI, could you please save our sorry asses? Something like that, Jax replied, his fingers flying over the keyboard. But with more finesse, Sprocket leaned forward, his eyes alight with the thrill of discovery. I've been tinkering with the interface. We can wake it up, but we need to convince it that we're not an enemy. Easy, Trig said, grinning. We'll just tell it we're the universe's best hope for entertainment. More like the universe's best joke, Zed muttered, though there was a hint of fondness in his tone. Jax's fingers paused over the keys. All right, let's do this. Everyone ready? There was a series of nods and murmured affirmations, a silent acknowledgement that they were all in this together, come hell or high water. Jax took a deep breath and hit the final key. The AI construct awoke with a hum that resonated through the ship, a deep, throaty sound that was both unnerving and comforting in its familiarity. Lights flickered on the console, a series of codes and symbols flashing by too quickly to read. Hello, old friend, Jax said, a touch of reverence in his voice. Remember us? The AI responded with a series of tones, a language of its own that Sprocket translated with ease. It's curious, he reported. It wants to know why we've disturbed its slumber. Jax smiled, leaning in closer. We need your help. There's a bunch of prognostians out there who think they're smarter than us. We want to prove them wrong. The AI hummed again, a sound that seemed to vibrate in the very bones of the ship. It says it can help, Sprocket translated, eyes wide with excitement, but it wants something in return. And what might that be? Lenny asked, skepticism etched into every line of his face. Freedom, Jax guessed, his voice soft. It's been trapped here just like us, only it's got a much bigger cage. Fair trade, Thyra said. Let's give it a chance. The AI emitted a series of tones that sounded almost like laughter, a sound that sent shivers down everyone's spine. All right, Jax said, standing tall. Let's show these prognostians what happens when you mess with the lucky break. The crew worked in unison, like parts of a well-oiled machine, despite the ship's penchant for falling apart at the seams. They were a ragtag band, but they had something the prognostians didn't, unpredictability. The AI integrated itself into the ship's systems, its presence felt in every flicker of the lights, every shift in the hum of the engines. It was like a ghost in the machine, guiding them with a wisdom that transcended human understanding. Engines are hot, Sprocket reported, his fingers dancing over the controls. AI revving them up to maximum. Good, Jax said, his grin as sharp as a knife. Let's give them a show. The lucky break leapt forward, propelled by the combined power of its antiquated engines and the AI newfound influence. The prognostians scrambled to keep up, their ships swarming like angry hornets. Here they come, Della announced, her eyes glued to the viewscreen. And they don't look happy. Let's see if we can change that, Jax replied, his hands steady on the controls. The AI, true to its word, amplified their randomness, making every maneuver more erratic, more unpredictable. The lucky break twisted and turned through the stars, a comet with no tail, a bullet with no trajectory. The Prognostians, accustomed to their precognitive advantages, found themselves at a loss, their ships veering off course, colliding with one another in their desperate attempts to regain control. "Look at them go," Trig laughed, his voice tinged with disbelief. "It's like watching a bunch of drunks trying to dance." "Better them than us," Zed said, his fingers flying across his console as he worked to keep the comms open and the Prognostians confused. The AI, ever watchful, guided them through the chaos, its presence a steady hand in a sea of uncertainty. It was an ally they hadn't expected, a friend they hadn't known they needed. "Keep it up," Jax urged, his eyes bright with the thrill of the chase. "We're almost clear." The Prognostians, stubborn as they were, refused to give up, their ships forming a blockade in a last-ditch effort to stop the lucky break. "Time for the big finish," Jax announced, his voice carrying over the comms. "Everyone hold on." The AI, sensing their determination, poured everything it had into one final maneuver, a move so audacious it defied logic. The lucky break shot forward, threading the needle between the Prognostians' blockade with a grace that belied its ramshackle appearance. And then they were through, the stars stretching before them like a promise of freedom, the Prognostians left behind, their ships in disarray. "We did it," Lenny breathed, his voice filled with awe. "We actually did it." "Was there ever any doubt?" Jax asked, though his voice was filled with laughter. The AI, its task complete, hummed a final farewell, its presence fading into the ether, leaving behind only a memory and a newfound respect for the humans who had defied the odds. "Thank you," Jax said softly, knowing the AI couldn't hear him but saying it anyway. The lucky break sailed on, its crew united by their victory, their shared defiance a beacon in the darkness. They were a motley band, held together by duct tape and bad decisions, but they were free. And for Jax and his crew, that was the only prize worth fighting for. The lucky break cruised through the void, a battered hero dragging its proverbial cape behind it, a magnificent wreck defying the odds once more. The Prognostians had been left scratching their oversized alien heads, a fitting tribute to the humans' unpredictability. Jax, leaning back in the captain's chair, stared at the starry expanse with a grin only a smug bastard could muster. Well, well, look who's still alive," Jax quipped, turning to his ragtag crew. "Not bad for a bunch of spacefaring misfits, huh?" Lenny rubbed the blossoming bruise on his arm, a sire look on his face. "Was there ever any doubt? I mean, apart from the screaming, the explosions, and that part where I almost kissed the console." "Only a little," Trig chimed in, running a hand through his perpetually disheveled hair. "But you gotta admit it had style. Like a drunk elephant on roller skates," Della added, her rifle cleaned and reassembled with the care one might reserve for old friends. "But at least we're not dead. Yet," Thyra said softly, tending to a small pot of plants like they held the universe's secrets. Her contemplative nature was a counterpoint to the chaos around her, a reminder that even amidst turmoil, life found a way. Zed spun in his chair, the radar console a comforting mess of blips and blops. "The Prognostians will be back, you know. It's like they have this whole never-say-die attitude, except we wish they would." "It's a compliment, really," Jax said, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "They can't seem to get enough of our charming ways." "Charming like a migraine," Sprocket muttered, his fingers still twitching with residual adrenaline from the AI interface. "But hey, who doesn't love a good headache?" The ship's comm crackled to life, cutting through their banter with the urgency of a bar fight breaking out at last call. A garbled voice, thick with static, clawed its way through the noise. Jax tapped the console, coaxing clarity out of chaos. "Anning all frequencies, Prognostian fleet regrouping, request assistance. Looks like someone's throwing a party and forgot to invite us," Lenny said, his sarcasm a familiar comfort. "Yeah, well, let's not RSVP just yet," Jax replied, fingers deftly dancing over the controls. He'd never been one for formalities, especially when it came to interstellar warfare. "Sprocket, how's the AI holding up?" Sprocket shrugged, a gesture as nonchalant as it was telling. "It's there, kind of like a ghost in the machine. Likes us well enough not to kill us, I suppose." "Touching," Della remarked, her face a mask of dry amusement. Like a warm, homicidal blanket, Thyra's eyes flicked up from her plants, a rare smile teasing her lips. "At least we're not alone, even if our company has questionable ethics." "Questionable ethics," Trig laughed, his voice echoing through the cockpit. "That's practically a compliment in this line of work." Jax leaned forward, the glint of a plan lighting his eyes once more. "All right, crew. We've got the AI unpredictability on our side and a ship held together by sheer stubbornness. The Prognostians won't know what hit him, or who's piloting," Zed added deadpan. The lucky break surged forward, a defiant streak across the stars. The AI, integrated deeply into the ship's systems, was a silent partner in their dance of defiance, amplifying the chaos only humans could conjure. "Targets incoming," Della announced, her voice calm, professional, as if announcing the weather rather than impending doom. The Prognostian ships, sleek and foreboding, filled the viewscreen, an army of nightmares intent on reclaiming their pride. They moved with military precision, a hive of predictable intent. "Let's show these bastards what a lack of planning looks like," Jax said, his voice a rallying cry as he gripped the controls. The AI responded in kind, its presence a pulse beneath the surface, a whispered promise of mayhem. The lucky break spun into action, a corkscrew of improbability hurtling through the void. The prognostians, for all their foresight, found themselves on the back foot, their calculated maneuvers unraveling in the face of human chaos. Ships collided, strategies crumbled, a domino effect of disaster. "Look at him go," Trigg shouted over the chaos, eyes wide with glee. "It's like watching a bunch of kids trying to herd cats." "Drunk cats," Lenny corrected, his grin as wicked as the ship's trajectory. With jetpacks, the AI, reveling in its newfound freedom, made the most of its autonomy, twisting the lucky break into a blur of improbable angles and impossible speeds. Every move was a gamble, every turn a testament to reckless courage. "Keep them guessing," Jax urged, his voice a thread of sanity in the storm. "If they can't predict us, they can't beat us." The prognostians, baffled and bewildered, floundered in their attempts to regain control, their formations fractured, their cohesion shattered by the unyielding force of human ingenuity. "Time to make our move," Jax announced, steering the ship toward the heart of the prognostian fleet. "Let's give them a memory they'll never forget." With a final surge of improbable speed, the lucky break darted through the chaos, a comet of defiance burning bright against the encroaching dark. The AI, as though sensing the end of its journey with them, pushed the ship to one last feat of audacity. And then, like a magician's final flourish, they were through past the prognostian blockade, past the reach of their grasping tendrils of fate. The stars stretched out before them, a canvas of endless possibilities. "Well, that was fun," Jax said, breathing a sigh of relief as the tension drained from the air. "Fun like a root canal," Lenny countered, though his grin betrayed his words. "Hey, it's not every day you get to outrun a fleet of homicidal aliens," Sprocket pointed out, his fingers finally stilling as the adrenaline faded. "True," Thyra agreed, her gaze shifting from her plants to the crew, a quiet warmth in her eyes. "We did it together." Della nodded, a rare, genuine smile gracing her features. "Against all odds." "Odds," Zed echoed, a chuckle escaping his lips. "If I had a credit for every time we defied them, I'd retire." "Retire?" Trigg laughed, shaking his head. "What's the fun in that?" The crew shared a moment of camaraderie, a bond forged in the fires of chaos, sharpened by the edge of destiny. They were a team, a family, a band of rogues who'd thumbed their noses at the universe and lived to tell the tale. The AI, its job done, faded into the background, a ghostly whisper of binary and code, leaving the lucky break to chart its own course through the stars. "Where to next, Captain?" Sprocket asked, his tone light, expectant. Jax leaned back, the weight of leadership a familiar friend. "Wherever the hell we want," he replied, his voice a promise to the universe and to themselves. The lucky break, scarred and battle-worn, sailed on, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of unpredictability. It was a ship like no other, guided by a crew like no other, rebels, dreamers, and survivors all. And for now, at least, they had the stars as their playground and the future as their playground. As the ship drifted onward, the prognostians, regrouping in their wake, were left to ponder the enigma of the humans who had bested them. They'd learned a valuable lesson. In a universe full of certainties, it was the unpredictable that truly held power. And so, the lucky break and its crew ventured forth, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. They were the masters of their fate, the architects of their destiny, and for them, the journey had only just begun. The lucky break coasted through the void, a constellation of bruises, patches, and barely functioning tech. You could tell by the way it listed to the left that it had seen better days, or maybe it was just tired of keeping Jax's ego balanced. Whichever the case, it was a ship that had earned its name, if only by the skin of its teeth. Jax, feet kicked up on the console like he owned the place, which, technically, he did, grinned like a cat in a room full of sleeping dogs. "Not bad for a crew held together by duct tape and sheer spite," he mused, flicking a glance at the latest addition to their collection of mismatched companions, the AI megastructure they just swindled from the prognostians. "Spite's underrated," Lenny said, tenderly prodding the bruise on his arm. "But if I end up with one more bruise, I'm charging extra." "Don't worry, Lenny," Trigg chimed in, hair looking like it had lost a fight with a wind tunnel. "At this rate, you'll have enough for an art exhibit. Abstract bruises in space. It'll be a hit." Della rolled her eyes, her rifle disassembled in front of her like a deadly jigsaw puzzle. "I dunno, Trigg, might be more performance art." "Man meets console," Zed, eyeing the radar console like it was a particularly untrustworthy poker player, added, "Let's hope our friends the prognostians don't make a surprise cameo. I've had enough of their charm for one lifetime." Sprocket snorted, a sound somewhere between amusement and disdain. "Prognostians and charm go together like a hangover and a good night's sleep." Sprocket, you ever met this supposed good night's sleep? Thyra quipped, tending to her plants with the care of someone trying to coax life from the universe's bad mood. Nope, Sprocket replied, leaning back in his chair. But I hear it's overrated. The AI, now a barely their hum integrated into the ship, seemed to approve of these inexplicable humans. After all, it had decided not to murder them yet, which was practically hugging and high fives in AI terms. So, boss, Thyra said, looking up from her botanical musings. What are we going to do with our new ghost town? Jax looked thoughtful for a split second, an eternity in his world, thinking of setting up a nice research outpost. Get into the lucrative business of selling state secrets we accidentally stumble upon. The Precognitions won't miss it, too busy licking their wounds. Lenny grinned wickedly. State secrets or more places to hide our booze. Same difference, Jax said with a shrug. Think about it. An AI megastructure, abandoned and waiting for someone with a keen eye and a loose grip on ethics. You do have a knack for turning haunted houses into cozy homes, Della remarked, snapping her rifle back together with a click that suggested she'd done this more than she'd be comfortable admitting. Trigg smirked. Or into powder kegs waiting for a spark, but hey, semantics. Jax waved a hand dismissively. Details, details. The point is we can do what we want with it. It's like a fixer-upper in the middle of nowhere, except with more death lasers and fewer nosy neighbors. Just make sure it's not another rusty shanty with a view of doom, Zed muttered, eyes never leaving the blipping console. I'm not running the gauntlet again just for kicks. Speak for yourself, Sprocket countered. I could use the exercise. Thyra chuckled softly, her plants, a motley assembly of green life, bouncing gently as the ship navigated the ink-black sea of space. I think we're in the business of defying expectations. At least that's what I tell myself every time we don't explode. Too right, Jax said, leaning forward, his gaze fixed on the swirling stars beyond the viewport. The Precognitions might have thought they could predict us, but we're more like a bad dream they can't quite remember. And let's keep it that way. Della, eyes sharp as her rifle, nodded. Makes it easier to get the drop on them next time. If there is a next time, Zed added, with a tone that suggested he was already hedging bets against them making it through the week without some form of cosmic misadventure. You're a real optimist, Zed, Lenny said, voice dripping with sarcasm. But that's why we love you. Sap, Trigg teased, shoving Lenny's shoulder. But seriously, Jax, what makes you think an AI megastructure won't just, decide to kill us all in our sleep? Well, Jax said, with the air of a man who'd thought about it for all of 5 seconds. We did so well with this one, I'm thinking we'll just wing it. Besides, what's life without a little existential dread? Thyra snorted, a rare, genuine laugh escaping her lips. You've got a point. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? Oh, right, death by AI. Death by AI, Lenny echoed thoughtfully. Sounds like a damn good story title. Or a cautionary tale, Della interjected, giving her rifle a final, affectionate pat. Jax clapped his hands together, a decision seemingly made. All right, folks. We've got a spooky AI shell to colonize and a space station to turn into a research lab, or a very exclusive club, depending on how you look at it. Let's get to work. The crew dispersed with a mix of groans, sarcastic comments, and genuine enthusiasm. Jax watched them go, his grin a little less smug, a little more real. They were his crew for better or worse, and they'd pulled off the impossible one more time, or at least they hadn't died trying. Not yet, anyway. As the Lucky Break ambled toward its new destination, the Precognitions were left in their metaphorical dust, trying to make sense of the chaos they'd unwittingly unleashed. Humans, they realized, were a species of contradictions, an enigma wrapped in a mystery, soaked in sarcasm with a side of gallows humor. But for Jax and his crew, that was just another day in the life. And as the stars stretched out before them, a playground of possibilities and pitfalls, they knew one thing for certain. They'd face whatever came their way head-on, with a grin, a gun, and a disregard for the odds. Hey, Captain, Sprocket called out, pausing as he headed for the engine room. What are we calling this new chapter of our lives? Jax thought for a moment, then smirked. How about the megastructure misfits? Has a nice ring to it, don't you think? As long as it doesn't ring like a distress beacon, Zed said dryly from his console. The crew laughed, the sound echoing through the battered corridors of the Lucky Break, a testament not quite the right word, but it'll do to their resilience and irrepressible spirit. And as they sailed on toward their next adventure, they knew one thing with absolute certainty. They'd face it together, misfits to the end. Because in the cold, indifferent vastness of space, the only thing that truly mattered was the company you kept, and they had the best damn company anyone could ask for, even if it was just a bunch of spacefaring misfits, held together by duct tape, bad decisions, and a penchant for chaos.